Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in this video, we are going to be talking about interior design rules to break. Some rules are meant to be broken, and that's what we're gonna be talking about today. I'm gonna share with you the interior design rules that I see mentioned over and over and over again, the conventional wisdom, and then I'm gonna be sharing why those rules are in place and why they do make sense sometimes. And I'm also gonna be sharing about the places where I think you can break those rules. And I'm gonna highlight some mistakes that you might make if you do decide to break the rules a little bit. So that's what we're gonna be talking about in this video. And also, by the way, real quick, in the description is a link to my interior design course that I'm gonna be launching soon. Pre-orders are still in place. There's a discount over there. So if you wanna check that out, feel free. I'm gonna be discounting only until it goes live, which is about a month or so. So feel free to check that out. Let's get back to the rest of the video. Okay, so first up, we are going to be talking about paint sheen, which is everybody's favorite topic of conversation because there is some rules around paint sheen that are typically shared. And that is that you should be painting your walls something like an eggshell or like a satin finish, not matte. That's the general consensus. And then you're gonna be looking for your trim to be done in something like a semi-gloss or something like a satin, something a little bit glossier. And then you're painting your ceilings flat. That's kind of the general conventional wisdom you see over and over and over again. And the reason for that is because the glossier paints tend to be more resistant to damage. So fingerprints, wear and tear, things like that. They tend to stand up better. They're more durable than your matte finishes or your matte sheens. So that's kind of why you would see that being used on something like trim, because it's gonna be in, closing doors, you're gonna be banging into it a lot more often. It's a lot more likely that your baseboards or your casings or things like that are going to get dinged. And so that is why you would typically see something like a semi-gloss on something like a paint trim. And then your ceilings being flat makes sense because you wanna go as flat as you can go, because the other thing is with matte paint is it tends to cover a lot of those imperfections that you see in the woodwork or, the wall, drywall or whatever. You tend to cover up a lot of those imperfections with a matte or a flat finish, while a glossier finish, again, more durable, but it's gonna kind of accentuate any of those sort of problems that you kind of have. So flat on the ceiling, because you never touch your ceiling and you want to hide those imperfections. Glossy on the casings and the baseboards or whatever on your trim work because it's more durable. And then something like an eggshell for your walls. That's kind of the conventional wisdom. But there are some ways I think that this does not apply. The first is that I think if you are going for a really modern look, if you are like a contemporary person and you want a place to feel really polished and really modern, and you're not really a fan of the traditional, and you're really going for something modern here, but you also don't have children, maybe you don't have pets, like you don't have a full house necessarily, and you're not looking at some really high traffic areas, and you're all adults that live there, and you know that you can really take care of your walls, I would really strongly consider going for a matte paint on your walls. And again, a lot of people would recommend something like a satin, something like an eggshell, because they're looking for that durability on the walls. But again, if you're the type of person that takes care of your walls, you're mostly adults that are gonna be there, you don't necessarily need that level of durability. And what you get out of a matte paint, I think is gorgeous. You just get something really beautiful and really crisp and really modern. So that is a rule that I think is worth considering breaking if you are a person that can handle the lack of durability that you're gonna get by going with something like a matte. The other thing is that glossy, I think it's a little bit limiting to sometimes say that you're going with a semi-gloss or a satin finish on just your casings and your baseboards, because there are some risky but fantastic and beautiful spaces that incorporate semi-gloss paint or high gloss paint, and you get amazingly gorgeous, beautiful, dramatic results. I'm gonna show some of them here that are absolutely stunning, really, really cool, but you can see that the person here took some risk, right? They clearly knew what they were doing when they were putting sort of a glossy finish on a ceiling, because they wanted something that would really sort of highlight some of the features in their space, and they were really going for that look, and it was super, super intentional. So I do think that overall, the conventional wisdom is correct. I do think you can design some really gorgeous, beautiful spaces incorporating in different types of paint sheen rather than just what you typically see the conventional wisdom is. The other thing is glossy paints are awesome at highlighting some gorgeous architectural details. So let's say you're looking at a painted fireplace, let's say you've got an archway, let's say you've got a gorgeous door or some spindles that you just want to really highlight and really set off with some amazing, gorgeous paint, and you want that glossiness. consider trying a high gloss or a semi-gloss paint in some of those areas, and they do a fantastic job of setting off those architectural details. Small thing, definitely not something for the faint of heart. It definitely takes a skilled hand to sort of play with sheen a little bit, but it goes a long way to really level up your space. I think it looks really stunning when done properly. So the rule does make sense for most people, but like we're gonna see in this video, sometimes it makes sense to break the rules a little bit. And I think playing with paint sheen is one of them. Okay, next up on my list is going to be only paint small spaces with light colors, specifically looking at white. This is very common advice that you get, right? If you've got a really small room, paint it white, paint it a really light color, because it's going to make the space feel bigger. It's gonna make it feel more open, whatever. And don't paint it a dark color because it'll look like a tiny little cave, and that's awful and no one wants that. Such is the conventional wisdom. This is a rule I think worth considering to break, and I'll tell you why. But first, let's talk about why it's in place. The reason this rule is in place is because, let's talk about LRV, which is, again, we're gonna stick with paint for a second here, and that is LRV stands for light reflectance value, and it's roughly translated to the percentage of light that bounces off of a paint. So all the manufacturers of paint, Sherwin-Williams, Behr, Benjamin Moore, whatever, they all list the LRV for every paint color on their website. So it's really easy to find, but it comes from 0 to 100. Nothing's 0 and nothing's really 100, but it's on that scale. And basically it's that percentage of the light that bounces back off of the paint. So if you were to take something like Behr's blank canvas, they've got right here that it has an LRV of 84. Roughly means that 84% of the light that hits it is going to bounce back into the rest of the room. While if you take something like Behr's black, you're looking at an LRV of 5. So that's going to mean that the light is going to be absorbed and it's not going to reflect back into the rest of the space. So the logic stands. If you've got a really small room and you have a high LRV, which is going to be white, you're going to bounce a lot of light off and therefore make the space feel really beautiful and open. That conventional wisdom makes sense. That rule makes sense. But sometimes I will say that if your intention is to actually embrace the smallness of a small space, it can actually be really gorgeous. Take something like a bathroom, which is usually quite small. I love really dark bathrooms because, you know, I just think like humans are really funny creatures, right? Like we love being in big, bright, open spaces, but also sometimes big, bright, open spaces can make you feel a little bit vulnerable, and being in a small, intimate space that's really closed in can actually feel really cozy and safe, you know? I don't know, I just think like thousands and thousands of years ago, we probably like lived in caves, and you know, there's just something really comforting about being in a little cave and not feeling like anybody's gonna like jump up on you, you know? To me, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little bit above my pay grade in terms of talking about like human psychology, but this makes sense to me, right? Humans like to be in small, cozy, enclosed spaces. Not claustrophobic. We're not talking a claustrophobic space, although obviously some people might find that. But I just think having a small, intimate space that's really cozy and you know, you feel just really safe and comfortable, I think that's good. I think that's actually a beautiful, wonderful thing. And so sometimes, if that's your intention, and if you're kind of following my wavelength here in terms of sometimes what is a really great, beautiful space to be in, I think that having that, embracing that smallness and that, you know, dark, intimate sort of cave-like space is actually a really beautiful, wonderful thing. So in the case of some bathrooms, I've seen some of these, like the one that just comes to mind is like David Harbour and what's her face? What's that woman? Lily Allen, right? So they have their little townhouse in Brooklyn or something, and they've got their little bathroom, and I'm just like, oh, it's like the most gorgeous room in the house, I think, like of their little architectural digest tour they did. The other bathroom has carpet in the bathroom, which I'm not here for, but this one was really small and cute and just like this little jewel box. It was just really, really beautiful. I love, love, love this room. They've got this really deep sort of gorgeous royal blue, and it's very dark and it's very small and it's very intimate, and I love that. So I think this is a rule that should be broken more often. I don't think just because it's a small space, you need to go with light colors. I think you can go with black, navy, gray, charcoal, any of the different colors of the rainbow, just really that darker shade. You're looking at an LRV of like kind of less than 30 or something, I think is a really, really beautiful tone to use in a really small, intimate space. I think it's gorgeous. I think it's a rule worth breaking, unless you want big, bright, and open, in which case, if that's your intention, absolutely go with a light color. But if you want to embrace the sort of darker tones, I think it works gorgeously in a small space as well. Okay, next up on my list is going to be don't mix metals. Oof, the mixing metals controversy. I did a video on mixing metals. I'm gonna post it here. Go check it out afterwards if you want my full view just on mixing metals alone. alone. But I would say the reason why people say don't mix metals is, I think, because, you know, they want to create a really cohesive look, and tying your metals together shows that you intentionally really tried to match all your metals, and it looks really polished, it looks really tight, and it looks like you kind of use that similar tone. Maybe it's brushed gold, brass, matte black, you know, brushed nickel, chrome, whatever you did, and you really intentionally chose all those pieces and you strung them all together, and it looks really cohesive, and you can see the sort of repetition of those metals in the space, and that can be really beautiful. I understand that logic. I also don't like it because I think mixed metals can create a look that is unique and beautiful and interesting, and a little bit more just it's more space to play with different tones rather than just kind of feeling it's a little bit one note. Now there's nothing wrong with choosing one metal, but I think that there's also nothing wrong with choosing 2 or 3. Let me talk about a couple of ways that I think you can really use it, because I understand the logic why people don't mix the metals, because again, they're a little bit afraid, but I think there's some ways that you can do it right. So first of all, I would say matching the function with the metals that you're using. So if you're in the kitchen, if you've got drawer pulls in your kitchen on all your different cabinetry, I would consider always using the same metal for your drawer pulls. But maybe for your faucet, which is sort of water plumbing thing, it's a totally different function than your drawer pulls. That's an opportunity to play with a very different sort of metal. So you can use something different there. If you're in the bathroom, same thing. Your faucet should probably match your tub filler, while something like the drawer pulls and maybe some of the accessories in the bathroom might be a little bit different. So I think matching your function is a really great way to sort of still have a system for mixing metals that makes a little bit more sense than having a tub filler in chrome and then a faucet in gold. To me, that's weird. The second thing I would really consider is choosing very different metals that contrast beautifully, so it really looks like you intentionally chose 2 different. So brushed gold and matte black, fantastic. While going with something like brushed nickel and chrome, looks like you tried with the silver tone metals, but it just didn't work out, and you sort of weren't able to figure it out, so you just kind of chucked them both in together and it didn't work. I would really hesitate with matte black and oil rubbed bronze, or a B, for example. Like, those 2 are too similar and you're not getting the contrast that you're looking for when mixing your metals. So I would say this rule is a decent rule in order, you know, because there's nothing wrong with using the same metals in the entire space, but I also wouldn't lose sleep over it. And if you are mixing metals, I think that there's some nice ways that you can do it that are still beautiful and still looks cohesive, while also embracing the mixed metals and having a little bit of fun with all your different metals that you're putting in your space. So this rule makes sense, but I break this rule all the time, and probably you should too. Okay, my next rule to break is repeating colors over and over and over again so that everything looks cohesive and don't have any pops of color. This one is a hard one for me because I feel like I sometimes have recommended this because I do think that overall the rule makes sense, right? Which is clearly defining your color palette before you just go out to the shops and go like, oh, I really like that table and that couch and that coffee table. And then before you know it, you stick it all in your place and you're like, none of this goes together, right? If you just don't have a plan for how you're gonna put something together, you don't have a plan for how you're gonna pull colors out of different places, and you don't have a cohesive color palette before you design your space, sometimes that can lead to mishmashed results, to be honest. So I get where that rule is coming from. And, you know, I've done a video on how to make your place more cohesive, and that was something I recommended, is really keeping to that color palette, keeping it really tight, and it makes sense. But I do think that pops of color can make sense. I don't love an accent wall. I don't really love an accent wall, but playing with something like a couch, like a big chunky piece of furniture that breaks away from the rest of the color palette, and it's sort of its unique sort of thing that really stands alone with kind of a really large presence in something like your living room or a bed in the bedroom, for example. I do think that there is a place for a really gorgeous pop of color, especially if you have the rest of the space is really dialed in and a really tight color palette and is predominantly quite neutral. Sometimes it's a bit risky, but I do think that you can take a very neutral space, maybe it's a black and white space, maybe it's just kind of like beige and browns, and then for you to put something like a gorgeous orange, you know, couch in the center of a room, I think can look really, really beautiful. Orange is maybe kind of an odd example because orange and brown are actually quite related, but so arguably it is sort of staying within the same color palette. But taking something like when I did a Karen Bond, I don't know if you guys remember, I did a video on the Karen Bond tour video that I did a couple months ago. She had like a really black and white, gray, neutral space. And then she had this really big, beautiful, sort of peacock blue colored sofa that was not repeated anywhere else in the space, and it was completely on its own. It was just this big, bold pop of color. I think it really worked there because it was in a sofa. It had such a huge presence in that space, and it was so different from everything else that was in the room. But the rest of the room was really tight, really cohesive, really neutral. I do think in those situations, with a skilled hand, you can actually experiment with really big, bold pops of color, and it can be really successful. Again, I will emphasize having the rest of the room be really cohesive in style and maybe even color, I think really opens up the space for you to have a lot more fun with those big pops. That's kind of my thing. It is a little bit risky, I'll be honest. It's a rule that you don't have to break, because I do think going with, you know, if you look at that, I'm gonna show some images of that Karen Bond room. You know, if you were to go with something like a black velvet couch, it totally would have worked in that room, so you don't need the pop of color. But if you're willing to get creative and experiment a little bit and have a little bit of fun, I think it can really work. And even though that color is repeated nowhere else in the room, because it's consistent with the style and the rest of the room is neutral and cohesive, it totally works in this space. So definitely a rule that once in a while you can consider breaking. Okay, and then my next rule is going to be use only one wood finish. Okay, let's talk about wood tones for a second here, even though I did a video on this, I think. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure I did. I'll link it if I did. Anyway, on wood tones. So, conventional wisdom is choose a wood and then just ride that one. You know, just like if you're gonna go with oak, just making sure to keep using oak, because if you're using oak with walnut or with ash or something else or a different stain completely, it's not gonna look great and it can be a little bit of a problem. I think that this rule absolutely can be broken, because I think that wood is just timeless and beautiful and never really looks bad. And it's actually somewhat easy to coordinate different wood tones together in the same space and have it look really beautiful. And then the other thing, of course, is that you want to make it really cohesive. So if you're always, you know, ash is going to go with ash because, well, ash always goes with ash because it's the same wood tone. So using that consistently throughout the whole space means, of course, it's going to look good together. But I do find a lot of people get really stressed trying to match all their different wood tones, and they're like, you know, my couch leg doesn't match my wood flooring and the two woods are gonna be next to each other. It's gonna be a complete disaster. Like, a lot of people really freak out about using different wood tones in the same room. Calm down, it's gonna be okay. So the good news is that in the end, I think that wood generally leans warm. So it's gonna be on the warm side of the color wheel as opposed to the cooler side. So it typically wood, which is mostly brown, is going to be kind of in the red, yellow, orange sort of family. That is really where brown kind of sits on the color wheel. And so it's gonna sit on the warmer side. So I think that everything, so if you've got something like ash or oak, which is more on the yellowy side, or you've got cedar, which is more on the reddy side, or you've got acorn, which is more on the orangey side, you're probably gonna be okay because it's all kind of in the warm family of colors. The bad news is that if you really bought into the 2012 to 2019 gray wood flooring trend, gray is not a natural color really that you see in wood, so it can be quite difficult to match warmer toned woods with cooler gray toned woods. So if you have a cooler toned gray wood in your space, that's okay. There's lots of different other things that can be coordinated with it. It can still look beautiful and gorgeous and all those wonderful things. So I don't necessarily think that you need to match all the different wood tones. I think it's more important that they're kind of in the same family, that you don't overthink these things, and that you're sticking kind of in a similar area of sort of different, sort of similar color temperatures. And I think if you're kind of doing that, then you're probably gonna be okay. So this is a rule that is commonly broken. I think it's a great source of stress for a lot of people, and it ought not to be, because I don't think it needs to be that stressful. You don't have to just stick to oak because you decided on oak wood flooring. You can still mix it in with lots of different other wood tones, and it's gonna be just fine. So definitely consider breaking this rule. I do all the time, and yeah, it works really well. You don't stop stressing. Stop stressing about the wood tones. Wood's beautiful, okay? Calm down. Okay, so I'm gonna do another couple real quick over on the Patreon. I'm gonna link that down as well in the description if you'd like to join over there. I always like to do an extra couple over there because they're sweet to me over on the Patreon and we have a great time over there. So I'm gonna do another couple of extra rules that I think should or can be considered broken. But so if you wanna head over there, feel free. If not, of course, I will see you all in the next video here over on YouTube. I'm gonna link here to my video on mixing metals because I think you guys would really like that. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like that one. So I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks, bye.